What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Fall Obsession podcast. My name is Sam Thrash. I'm your show host over here. Thanks for tuning in to one of our episodes. This week, we're still on the theme of whitetail over here at Fall Obsession Podcast. I have one of our show producers, Mike Tepe, join me again this week. He also hung out with myself and Ryan last week when we had Mr. Don Higgins on our podcast. It was a great episode and definitely encourage you guys to go back and tune into that one if you missed it. Very, very educational and informative to anybody wanting to learn more about whitetails and take their deer hunting game to the next level. But this week, we sit down exclusively with Mike to talk about just his Midwest whitetail hunting efforts that he had this year, kind of get a report from over there. He has some awesome stories, some very educational and great experiences this year hunting up there. Also, some challenges that he talks about. Dealt with some EHD and some other stuff up there. So it's a great podcast. Mike and I are good friends. We've shared some hunting camp before and really, really enjoy each other's company. So it makes for a good podcast. And I hope you guys enjoy that. Before we get to it, though, Hoot Camo is an official partner of Fall Obsession. Been rocking Hoot gear for a couple seasons now. Mike is a Hoot Camo wearer as well. The gear is great quality, keeps you warm in the elements, holds up phenomenally. The patterns are very versatile. Even though Hoot is a Texas-based company, I have worn Hoot in far more environments than Texas. I've worn it in the flatland plains of Colorado, the mountains in central Idaho. Mike is up there in the Midwest in Michigan and Indiana, and he's rocking Hoot gear. So works in a ton of different environments. The patterns, like I said, are extremely versatile, adapt to different environments. Absolutely love my Hoot gear. Go to hootcamo.com. Check out everything they have going on over there. You guys will notice that if you're looking to get into a good quality set of camouflage, that Hoot is the way to go when it comes to the price. And if you use the code Fall Obsession 15, that will save you guys some money at checkout on top of their already competitive gear prices. So Hoot Camo, go check them out. Bear River Archery is a Fall Obsession partner and the official bow shop of Fall Obsessions. If you guys are in the North Texas area, you need to go check out Bear River and Van Alstine, see everything that Justin's doing over there. He's got a great shop, great setup, and he will get you taken care of. So head on over there, check him out, and be sure that you let everyone at Bear River know that Fall Obsession sent you. Trophy Edits is a Fall Obsession partner. If you have a photo from this season or a previous season that is not quite what you were hoping it would be, maybe it's blurry, low lighting, needs to be cleaned up by somebody that knows what they're doing, you can send that over to the Trophy Edits team and they will help get you squared away and make the most of your hunting and outdoor memories. So go to the link in this podcast description. That will take you over to their website. You can see everything that they do over there. And by clicking on that specific link, it will also tell them that you guys came from us. We always appreciate that. Go check out Trophy Edits. The Outdoor Call Radio app is a podcast partner. Outdoors Dan from Respect the Game TV. He created an app that you can download on any device where you can stream hunting shows and podcasts on a loop every single day. Fall Obsession Podcast plays on that loop on Mondays. That's the same day as our new publications, as well as tons of other hunting shows and podcasts that we all know and love. Go download the Outdoor Call Radio app today. It is free and you can start streaming immediately. And be sure that you follow Outdoors Dan and the Outdoor Call Radio app Facebook page on social media because they do some local Midwestern radio station broadcasts live throughout the week. And if you're not local to those stations, you can catch those broadcasts on those social media pages. Again, it's the Outdoor Call Radio app. Go download it today. Last but not least, Ridge Rock Hunt Company is a Fall Obsession partner. Derek Eves, he's the man over there at Ridge Rock, setting folks up with vetted and trusted outfitters across the country. So if you've been saving up for that big adventure, that once in a lifetime hunt, perhaps you need to give Derek a call. He'll work with you on all the details and find what's right for you. It's Ridge Rock Hunt Company. You guys go check them out. Finally, thank you guys again for tuning into this podcast. Whatever platform you are streaming on, whatever app you're using, please hit that follow, subscribe button, whatever they have up there for you. If turning on your notifications is an option, be sure that you guys do that. Head on over to the YouTube channel. We post a lot of new content on that YouTube, and we have even more coming. If you guys are interested in perhaps the podcast videos, You can find those on the YouTube channel, but we also have a bunch of other shows and feature films that we're producing and working on our editing room right now that will be hitting that YouTube in the very near future. So you want to be subscribed. You want to have those notifications turned on. That way you guys know every time we drop a new video. The website is fallobsession.com. All of our content filters through there. And if you want to support the show, you can pick up a hat or a shirt from the website as well. We always appreciate that. Be sure that you're following us on social media, all the major platforms. We post daily, sometimes multiple times a day, with updates and educational content from our staff across the country. And be sure that you are streaming our shows on Carbon TV. This podcast streams on Carbon, as well as our staff inspired video podcast series called Couch Chats. You can find that on Carbon TV. And then we have two different hunting shows on Carbon as well. The one that I myself am involved in producing down here in Texas is called Texas Dirt. And then Mike, my guest this week, he is the producer of our show up in the Midwest called Midwest Mindset. So you can check out Texas Dirt and Midwest Mindset on Carbon TV and start streaming for free today. With that, we're going over to the episode, going to catch up with Mike, talk some Midwest whitetails. You guys are listening to another Fall Obsession podcast.
Oh, you got her, dude. She's down. Let's go.
Dude, I just shot a deer of a lifetime.
Freaking smoked him.
One with nature, and if you're a believer, one with God.
Definitely gets your heart pumping. Boy, you are in trouble.
Fall Obsession Podcast.
Welcome back, everybody. Another Fall Obsession podcast. I'm Sam, bringing you guys into it once again and recording this week with one of our own staff members and producer of the Midwest Mindset Show on Carbon TV, Mike Tepe. Welcome back to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sam.
Always a pleasure, man. Always a good time to sit down and talk some deer hunting. I'm kind of had a little bit of, I don't know, deja vu or something earlier a couple weeks ago, thinking about that mule deer hunt that we had last year together. Wishing I could do that again.
Whenever you're ready, let's start putting in for tags. I'm
I
ready
know.
when you are.
We got to share
Like I
another
said,
hunt.
that invite's still going. If you want to take me up on it, coming out here and trying your hand at some of these Midwest whitetail.
Man, yeah, I might legitimately talk to you about that next year. That might be to be determined, but at least see what you got going on out there and get to experience it. I don't have any out of state hunts planned right now for next year. Don't have any intentions on putting in for any big Western tags or anything at the moment. So that might be a trip worth taking or something. And I'm sure our wives seem to be kind of cut from the same cloth in some regards. So the families could probably have a good time with it too, I would imagine. So
Yeah, it's funny you bring up wives. My wife and I were talking literally this weekend. We had a little trip up north to look at some land, and she was scrolling on Facebook as I'm driving down the highway, and she's like, "Oh man," I said, "What?" She goes, "Brooke," and I was like, "Brooke?" She goes, "Yeah, Thrash," and I said, "Okay, what's up?" "I'm just jealous because they live so far away. I feel like we'd be great friends if they lived close." I was like, "Yeah, you two are spitting images of each other."
yeah, they definitely would. My wife has her own little tight-knit like text thread group of a bunch of girls down here that are all in that same boat and everything like that. And then I've said multiple times, I was like, you and Sydney would hit it off. No doubt about that.
No doubt about it. Yeah.
Well, maybe something to think about for 25 then when we start
Right.
getting a little bit closer. So
Yeah, we got time.
yeah, for sure. Well, man, I know you're no stranger to the show. We're Fall Obsession for sure. Like I mentioned, you have your own series that you produce with us on Carbon TV, Midwest Mindset, and a lot of the management strategies and tactics that you're doing on different properties and everything like that. So I say that to encourage folks to go check out the show on Carbon TV if they haven't already. I know Nick's working on episodes fairly consistent right now and everything, and we got plenty more to put out to catch people up on this season, but a lot of great info out so far. But I want to talk to you about just that, about this season, 2024, and kind of where you were going into it and how it played out for you.
Man, where we were going into it. Oh, 2024 will be a year to be remembered, and that will be for the highs and that will be for the lows. Um, Going into the season, wow. Sometimes it's easy to live in the moment and say, man, I can't remember since when was something looking this good. You know what I mean? And sometimes that's a little, short sighted. We're not really thinking that well about the past and for comparison's sake. Uh, July, August, and even mid September, things looked absolutely phenomenal for us here in the Tepe household. All the ground that we had or have to hunt in Indiana and in Michigan, we had multiple shooters. It was like I think to myself, I don't think there was a single property that we had that I didn't have a shooter for myself. That's something that I felt like was at minimum 4 years old that I could go after. Um, and that all changed. That changed in a blink of an eye. There's this nasty thing called EHD, and if you're a deer hunter in the North America, you've definitely heard of it. And if you haven't, just count you're lucky. Lucky that you haven't, because once you've dealt with it, it's a gut punch, and it can be a several year gut punch, because even though you may only get it once every 5 years, it can take 5 years to recuperate and get the age class on these bucks what you're looking for. So, yeah, I mean, I can speak, even behind the house and some of my Michigan ground, I had some very exceptional deer that had made it from last year that I was extremely excited about, and they all disappeared. Um, a lot. I'm not the guy that goes and puts boots on the ground looking to confirm that they're dead in a ditch somewhere next to water, like they all die if they've been hit with EHD. I got confirmation from several neighbors that they found them dead in their ponds, and the DNR was posting stuff on local Facebook pages and stuff, and all the local Michigan pages here in southern Michigan, northern Indiana, X amount of deer found. So it was kind of a change tactics, and it didn't happen until so late. You're game planning for certain deer, thinking that I'm going after this deer, I'm going after this deer, I'm going after this deer, and all of a sudden, like, you take your target list and you just blow it up. And that's where we were at. I think we salvaged the year out. I think we had an exceptional year overall, but it definitely wasn't what you'd hoped for, I guess, if that makes sense. My youngest, or my not my youngest, my middle child, my boy Arrow, he got into his first year this year of deer hunting. My oldest daughter Ella, this is her second year of deer hunting. Last year she was very successful: 3 shots, 3 kills, 2 bucks, one Indiana, one Michigan, a doe in Michigan. Now fast forward to this year, they're both up to bat now. Youth season here in Michigan is middle of September. I took Arrow behind the house. I want all the kids to get their first deer on our property that we live on. That's just something I want to do selfishly. And obviously they don't have any problems with it. So Dad's done a pretty good job at getting this property back here, about like shooting fish in a barrel. So we took him out there for youth weekend, opening evening hunt. I'd been doing a lot of scouting out there, been watching lots of deer, felt really confident he was getting an opportunity. My wife took Ella to another piece of ground about 15 minutes from here, set her up on that ground, and boom, they had a double within 30 minutes of each other. Both ended up killing some Michigan bucks. Fast forward to 2 weeks later, took them to Indiana for the youth season in Indiana so they could use the guns. Arrow, first night out, 15, 20 deer. They're all around us. Nice little year and a half old 7-pointer comes up, gives him 25-yard shot. Got that on video. Smokes it, watch it go down. Ella, she's gotten to the point now where she's killed 3-year-and-a-half-old bucks in the last 2 years, last year and this year. And I told her, hey, it's time to step it up. if you're going to shoot another buck, it's going to have to be at least 2.5 years old. We're going to have to start, got to start working our way up that ladder. We're not just going to shoot 1.5-year-old bucks every year.
Right.
So Indiana youth season rolls around, and it's her turn to get up to bat. I take her out. She passes up some does, a little 1.5-year-old spike, nothing else. So her season ended up actually coming down to gun opener in Indiana like it did last year. Same blind, same food plot. But it was an evening hunt this time, not a morning hunt. And she passed up several small bucks and does. And then 20, 30 minutes before dark, here comes a nice basket 8-pointer, 2-year-old I'd been watching. He busted off a G2. She got that one, shot that buck. So she leveled up a little bit. But yeah, I mean, so the kids went 2 for 2, got 2 bucks each, had a phenomenal season. As a dad, can't be any more proud of the shooting that they put out there. The quick, ethical kills. They only use a 44 mag rifle. They're not using a ginormous gun here, so they got to make clean shots, which they did on every one of them. So from just the overall 10,000-foot view, like, that's as successful as I could have asked for right there. I mean, me and the wife didn't need to shoot a deer the rest of the year. Those two doing what they did, seeing the smile on their face, especially that night they doubled up in Michigan. Getting the family photos together, had all 4 of us in there together, had a buddy come over and take pictures. I mean, we were just, grinning ear to ear as big as you could. And the kids were genuinely happy for each other. No little bit of, hey, whose is bigger, in there. But, we're all for that. A little friendly competition, especially when it comes to deer.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's cool to get your kids involved like that. And I am I'm a couple years behind you on that, or maybe a year. I don't know why. It might be next year might be his first year to actually be behind the gun. We'll see how that goes, but he's catching the bug pretty quick. He's excited about it, so looking forward to it.
Oh man, I mean, I will say they test your patience.
Oh yeah.
But there's just something about it, man. It's just I catch myself probably every hunt, if not every hunt, maybe every other hunt that I take them out. I catch myself just side eyeing them. We're sitting in a blind, box blind, maybe it's a pop up blind. I try and set these kids up for success. I've got them somewhere where they can move around a little bit and not alert all the deer in the area that we're there hunting them. So they're not on tree stands yet. That's coming.
Right.
But I'll catch myself just looking at them and just smiling, like just thinking to myself, wow, this is what I've always dreamt of. And here I am living my dream. I don't even know if it's their dream, and they don't even know how much it means to me. I hope one day when they get older, maybe they'll listen to this podcast, or, they'll really truly figure out, maybe once they become parents, understand why it meant so much to me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So I want to back up real quick because you started off and talking a little bit about the EHD and everything, and you mentioned those that are not in an area that's been hit by it, and being fortunate if that's the case, and I am fortunate that down here at least it's not something that we really pay much mind to right now, at least. But you talked about how the year started looking really good, and then as you got closer to the year, bucks started disappearing. Um, as somebody myself that knows some about EHD, but not as much as you or anybody listening to this podcast that might not fully understand it either, what is significant about that time of year, like right before the season? Is that just coincidence, or is there a reason that that's when everything hit?
So they always say they always say this, but yet they also say that this is not a blanket statement where you can't just say it's black and white. They claim that the wetter the spring, typically the worse off you are. And that's because your water levels will raise way up on the banks of ponds, creeks, rivers, lakes. And then what happens is it seems like a lot of times if we can't keep that moisture level up, we get towards the end of the summer around here, it gets hot for us, maybe not for you guys, but it starts to get to that where every single day is 85, 90, 95, and you're going weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, sometimes months without a drop of rain. You watch your water level now drop on the side of these banks. Now you allow soil to be exposed that was underwater. And then that is when these midges, flies, will come out of the ground, out of the soil. And then when deer come to these watering sources to drink, which I feel like they do even maybe a little bit more so when it gets a little hot. I know they get a lot of moisture that time of year from their food, but it seems like they might need to get a little extra sometimes based on what their diets of what they're consuming, and they go to these water sources a little more often. That's just from my trail camera intel on my water holes. That's what I'm basing that off of. Um, but they will go to these water sources. They get bit by these midges. Sometimes they can crawl into their skin. The bucks are very, very easily infected by them because of the soft velvet that they have on their antlers at that time of year in August, specifically, or late July. And these little midges can burrow themselves into the velvet, from what I can understand. And then once they get infected, it's not 100% kill rate from what I understand, but it's a very high kill rate. It's higher than 50-50.
Yeah.
Claim that if they survive, then they will be immune to it from then on. But yeah, survival rate's not high when it comes to this.
Hmm. So how did these bucks disappearing, how did that, as a hunter and somebody who manages property and pays attention to all this, how does that change your hunting tactics going into the season? Or I say hunting tactics, let me better clarify as far as what you're looking at as far as a quote unquote target buck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, your tactics stay the same. It's just your targets change. Maybe the ground that you're going to actually spend more time
Hmm.
on changes based on that. So if it wasn't for EHD hitting so hard in the area, I'm not that worried when deer disappear. I understand there's a fall shift. I understand deer rub their velvet off. They start to change things up. Their fall range can be different from their summer range, etc. But I watch these deer on camera and then on the hoof for years before I even typically ever find a target. It's rare that I ever just step out on one of these pieces that I've hunted for years, and all of a sudden there's this brand new buck that I've never seen before that I try to kill. Very rare, very, very rare. Most of these bucks that I go after, I have usually anywhere to 2 to 4 years worth of history with that deer. A lot of times, if it's less than 4, it's because I just started hunting that ground. Um, so when I find these deer, like what I was watching this year, a lot, I knew I had a lot of 3-year-olds make it last year that I had watched for the last couple of years. I was so excited, especially here in the state of Michigan, because it's so hard for me to find a 4-year-old here in the state of Michigan. And I had one behind my house that I've literally watched grow every single year since he was a year and a half old. He has unique brows, and it set him apart from every other deer in the woods since he was a year and a half old. His brows were always as tall or almost as tall as his G2s, even as a 4-year-old. This is the buck. This is actually the buck that in our Midwest mindset, he's the one walking across the food plot in the snow. And that was
Gotcha.
last year, 3-year-old that I let him go last year as a 3-year-old, told the wife, hey, if you want to shoot him, but he never gave her a shot, never came inside of 30. I think 35 was the closest she had him last year. Like that deer in particular, he actually survived DHD. But that's just an example. I have hundreds usually of trail camera pictures of these deer every single year. And then when you factor in 2, 3, 4 years that you're watching these deer to determine based on when you've seen them on the hoof and the pictures that you've got, if they're going to be a shooter or not. So when these bucks disappear, I don't always freak out. because I know they're going to be back. I have the habitat that they're looking for in the fall.
Right.
Typically, if I get pictures of them in the summer, they come through for 2-3 days and then they're gone for another month. And then they come back through for 2 or 3 days and then they're gone. And then they come back end of September, sometime in October, and then they're here to stay on and off, and that's how it is with the ground that I hunt. Basically because of how I've set it up to try and be more of a fall magnet. It's cool to get pictures of bucks in velvet, but I don't need 4,000 pictures in July for that deer to shed his velvet in September and never come back, except for maybe 1 week in the rut when he remembers where some doe's bed. I want him there for weeks on end. And so if it wasn't for the EHD, I wouldn't have flipped out and been so up in arms, like, oh man, when I'm hearing reports, especially in southern Michigan, that 60 to 80% of the deer had gotten killed due to EHD, I'm like, and then I'm noticing it on trail cameras. Some of the properties I hunt on trail cameras, I had that 8 acres that I've highlighted several times down the road on the Midwest Mindset that I've completely transformed. And last year we had all these young bucks that I didn't kill a single deer out there last year. I just wanted to keep the pressure off, wanted to let these deer get the age I wanted, had high hopes for out there. And so many neighbors reporting 40 found dead on this 40 acres, 120 found dead on this 200 acres.
Holy cow.
And I'm running the cell cameras out there for 6 straight weeks, and I'm getting the same 3 deer.
Oh, wow.
And it's like, okay, well, let's abandon that property because it don't look like it's going to happen out here this year.
Yeah.
And so, that's the type of stuff that I ran into. I will say that here at my property that I own, I had some bucks disappear like they normally would when they shed their, around August time. But they came back, even though I had feared the worst that some of these 3-year-olds, they came back. They did come back in November and stay. And actually the buck that the wife killed was one of them that we had watched last year as a 2-year-old. And that buck actually gave me quite a few pictures this summer in velvet. It was unlike normal years for me out here. Even mentioned that to some of my buddies and neighbors. I'm like, man, I've never gotten so many summer buck pictures. But the ag field beside me had green beans in it this year, and that had something to do with it because that was so highly desired in the summer months. And I would always get pictures. I'm just right on the edge of my property, not in it where it's all real thick and they're going to tear their velvet up. But yeah, he came back in November and then stayed until the wife actually got him. So we did have 2 bucks that I can think of off the top of my head that were 3-year-olds that actually did come back that I had feared were dead. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's a long-winded way of me trying to explain how I target deer, all the experience that I have with them. I kind of know from previous years what to expect when it comes to targeting some of these older deer. And so when EHD hit me hard this year, I'm not gonna lie, I did say, oh crap. I did just kind of think, F it, basically like we're gonna throw all the plans out the window. And that led me to actually go in and target that 5-year-old that I killed on October 4th in the reduction zone in northern Indiana, because I was still up in the air if I was going to go after this deer or not, because you only get 1 reduction zone buck tag in the state of Indiana. You have to harvest a doe first to earn it, which I did on October 1st. And then I had nothing bigger show up on that reduction zone piece. And I had been running cameras out there for months. So I thought, you know what? All these other bucks are dying. And since we had such a late frost this year, guys were having EHD kills all the way through the whole entire month of October, which is just unheard of around here. Okay. Usually if you get EHD, it's July, it's August, and sometime it leaks into September. But this year, the amount of deer that were just still falling over dead in October was so alarming that a lot of guys were freaking out. They're like, I have to get after my target buck because he might either be dead from the neighbor or he could be dead from EHD. And so I feel like it kind of sped up, some of your decision making this year opposed to other years where you're like, maybe I'll take my time on that deer, make the wind right, make the scenario right, where I felt like some of us kind of almost threw caution to the wind a little bit more, like if it was a rut hunt, because you're like, screw it, I know he's alive, I got pictures, I need to go after him now before he dies from EHD. And so that was a totally different animal. I've never dealt with that in all my years of hunting. I've never dealt with that. So, you know, October 4th, I go out there to the reduction spot in Indiana. October 3rd, actually went out there, passed up some really exceptional deer. I'm hoping they make it. I might have something there worth hunting next year. And then my target didn't show up on October 3rd. I went back out October 4th. He came in, presented me with a nice 35-yard shot, smoked him, retrieved him. I was, you know, it was just, that was the high of the year for me this year because of all these other deer not either being the age I wanted or they just disappeared. I'm assuming due to EHD. He ended up field dressing 200 pounds. Like I said, I've watched that deer for 4 years now. And or not 5 years. I'm sorry. I watched that deer for 5 years now. That's how I knew how old he was. He just never, ever amounted to anything from an antler standpoint. I actually think as a 3.5-year-old, probably put his best rack up as a 3.5-year-old, believe it or not. I had high hopes for him last year, and he literally regressed last year from a 3 to a 4-year-old. Hard saying why that was. Never, after I shot him, you know, skin him, you don't see any. I butcher all my own deer. Didn't notice anything wrong with the deer, honestly. I'd watched that deer on the hoof several times over the years. I'd never noticed anything wrong with that deer. I just think poor genetics. He had wonderful, you know, the area that he was at, he would have had great protein for a diet, but yeah, he just never amounted to anything.
Well, I mean, you know as good as anybody though, like killing a deer that you know is a mature deer, regardless of the antler size, that's the for somebody that cares about whitetail management, whitetail habitat, I feel like that's the goal. That's the I don't want to say
100%.
trophy because we're not necessarily trophy hunting, but it's not about antler size. You'd rather kill a mature deer.
No, 100%, I agree. Back in 2010, I was able to kill my first, what I would consider big buck. I had killed some 120, 130s. I arrowed a 162-inch 8-pointer back in 2010. Followed it up the very next year with a 146-inch 11-pointer with my bow, both coming out of state of Indiana. This was before I was hunting Michigan back then. And from that day forth, I was like, I'm not killing anything less than 140 inches or bigger. And I wasn't worried about age. I was worried about antlers. That went on for several years, and I ended up killing some 140-inch deer that ended up actually getting aged out at 3.5 years old. I can remember one I was after real hard. He scored 146 as a 3-year-old. And it's like, dang, like, was I happy? Yes. But like, I can't sit there and tell anybody that's a mature deer.
Right.
When I'm shooting 3.5-year-old deer. And so eventually I got to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm more worried about age class and what is considered mature for my area. And when I say what's mature for my area, I'm talking the top 10 to 20% age class in my area. So in our area that I hunt in, 80% of the deer are 3.5 and younger. It's that 20% that are 4, 5, 6. I mean, maybe there's a unicorn out there older than that around here, but if so, he's got a nice little hole to hide in. So that's what I target now. You know, if it's a 4-year-old and it's, you know, like the one I shot this year, it's got 120 inches of antler on his head as an 8. And that's a trophy to me, you know, for when it comes to just trying to go for mature deer. Like you said, not worried about trophy hunting, but just if I'm going to wrap my tag around a buck, I want it to know it's an older deer. But you know, I have no problem shooting does, fill the freezer either. So
Exactly. Well, that kind of piggybacks into the next question I was going to ask, just, you know, talking about kind of everything cumulatively that we've discussed so far with the EHD and, you know, now talking about age class and everything. And I know, and a quick plug too for last podcast with Don Higgins, which you were a part of too. We asked him about, aging deer. And he brought up that unless you have the history, if you have the pictures and the time spent with a buck from year to year, that's really the only true way before you kill them, at least, to know how old they are going into it. You might have an idea, but to know for sure. So with EHD hitting and mature deer, and this is all somewhat hypothetical, right? Mature deer disappearing, because of that, do you should a hunter change their focus to younger deer? Do younger deer stand a chance to survive into future seasons, or are you hurting the recovery time by shooting younger deer? What's that look like for somebody?
All I can speak on is for me.
Hmm.
Uh, I know for a fact that it has changed some guys' criteria on what they consider a shooter in this area this year. Um, I've seen it posted on Facebook. I know people personally that have told me or have told someone that I know personally, well, that, you know, so and so insert name decided to shoot such and such buck because of EHD. Um, at the end of the day, if they're hunting legally and they got their tags, that's all up to them. For me personally, I am not going to lower my qualifications on a shooter based on EHD or honestly any other outside factor that's out of my control. Um, if I accidentally shoot a buck that's under because I didn't have the um, experience with them that I thought I did, and it is a new buck to me or something like that, then that's on me. I gotta live with that at the end of the day. But I will not intentionally harvest anything that's under 4.5 years old in Indiana and Michigan just so that I can say I punched a tag.
Right.
I am extremely worried about next year and even the year after that on me being able to locate a buck in the state of Michigan that reaches my requirements of 4 years old. I'll be honest with you. I have not been hunting Michigan every year since 2019, hunted it a lot in years prior, but I've been hunting. This is by far the most dedicated and invested I have been. We live in Michigan now. We bought land in Michigan. I've moved my family here. Um, since 2019, I cannot remember a year going into January where I have so few bucks that are even 2.5 years old. I mean, it is like 90% of the bucks that I'm getting pictures of are year and a half old.
Wow.
And just the numbers are so down. My little piece I have here at my house in previous seasons, I run a pretty high camera count per acre on this property because I want to know what's going on. It's my own little slice of heaven. I want to know what's going on. And I would say on any given day, once October 1st came till January 1st, the end of the buck hunting season here in Michigan, I would have 6 to 12 bucks on camera on any given day. Now, like I said, 80% of them are 2.5 or younger, especially in Michigan. Like in Michigan, it's more 2.5 and under, or 80% of them. This year, I think I could count on one hand how many days I even had 6 different bucks on the property in a 24-hour span.
Wow.
So it was drastic. It was drastic. And then those days that I did have 6 or 7 bucks, 5 and 6 of them were year and a half old bucks.
Mm.
And the thing is, the uniqueness about it makes sense. First of all, I can remember a couple of the days that I had that happen was around some of those breeding times where I actually got video on my cameras of bucks breeding does on the property. And then other time was when I actually witnessed my target buck, that 4-year-old tall brow, breed a doe. So, that would make sense. There's going to be more bucks around for that. But just the overall buck numbers during the year just absolutely plummeted. I mean, it wasn't even like cut in half. It was like cut by 70%. So
Wow.
yeah, the next 2 years are just, man, I think it's going to be tough sledding to find a 3.5, 4.5-year-old buck in southern Michigan.
Yeah. Well, time will tell for sure, but I appreciate the answer on, you don't lower your age
Mhm.
standards or anything, just because of that. In our own unique way, I feel like down here in Texas, we kind of have a hunter has those decisions to make because like in the county that I hunt, you can take three does and then two bucks. And one of the bucks has to be what the state defines as a mature buck, which their definition of that is a 13-inch inside spread or greater. Um,
Mm.
that's how they define that.
That
And
could be a
then
year and a half old buck.
what's that?
That could be a year and a half old buck.
Like it could be a young buck that sprung up there real quick and everything. On my property, it's really not gonna be, but there are certainly areas that can. And then the other buck is their quote unquote uh, management buck or whatever you want to call it, which all it says is it's a young deer is what it is. It's one unbranched antler. So it can be a spike, it can be, a fork on one side and a spike on the other. There are some hammer spikes out there. Like my neighbor across the street sent me a picture a month ago of like this deer that had like a 12-inch spike on one side and a big old mainframe on the other. And I was like, dude, you need to go kill that deer. That's a heck of a Euro mountain. Yeah. So, but I mean, so there are the anomalies, but for me, like, I mean, if you don't care about any of that, if you're a meat hunter, yeah, you can shoot your spike and be done with it. I've shot and filled that spike tag before for sure in years past, but man, every year I battle with it. I'm like, man, unless I just see a buck that I look at and I'm confident just based on his body size that okay, this deer's got to be like three or something like that, and he's only got he's got one unbranched antler, not just broke off, he's just unbranched. Then maybe, but for me, it's hard to put an arrow in a deer like that. So I'm in a 5 deer county that included, but um, I really only want to kill four, I guess I should say, because I would rather, even though I've done it in years past, I would rather not fill that spike tag unless it's the last day of the season. I just need some meat or something, I guess. But I've seen those. I don't know. I hear guys down here in Texas at least argue that, oh well, if they're a spike, they're not going to be anything big, and I disagree with that. I've seen plenty of progression trail cameras that guys have posted or shared, whatever it might be, on deer that as a spike or even as a 2 or a 3 year old that didn't look like it had much going for it that turned around real quick, and
Mm-hmm.
4 and 5 years old. So I don't necessarily believe that.
No, I feel like that myth as one's a spike, always a spike, or just maybe you can say they have inferior genetics, maybe, but maybe he was just a late fawn. Maybe
Yeah.
that first year he was a late fawn and just didn't have that extra time going into antler development. But I feel like that myth has been debunked. Like you said, we've seen too many close case studies where there's even deer in fenced in areas that aren't even being fed high protein diets, and they watch them grow, and you can see that by the time they hit 4, 5, 6 years old, they still can be something very nice.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I guess it's the state of Texas way of trying to keep every bubba out here from shooting a 3-year-old basket rack 8 point. You can go on one end or the other of it, but those those bucks in the middle might be somewhat protected. I don't know. And that's frustrating for me too, though, because there's some deer out there that, I mean, this, that never grow out. They grow up. And I've
Mm-hmm.
seen deer before that you can look at and you're like, man, that deer's got to be older. That deer's got to be older, but legally in this state, you can't kill it because he doesn't have the spread. Even though it's Colorado, I mean, you were up there, you saw that monster whitetail that Tim Burgess
Oh,
had on the wall. That deer would have
gee.
not been legal on my property. And
No,
that's,
what was it, like 11, 12 inches wide?
yeah, it was less than that. I'm pretty sure it was like 10.
Oh
I'd
my
have
God.
to ask Tim again, but it was, I mean, it's narrow, but this is a 160 something inch deer.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's
just a
just,
monster. Can you imagine that? not be able
Yeah.
to shoot that one. It's not wide enough. Are you serious?
Yeah. I would probably be taking pictures to my game warden and be like, hey, man,
Yeah,
come on.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
No, I
So,
mean, I'm a huge, I'm not a big believer in telling people what they can and can't shoot. But with that being said, uh, I love the state of Indiana ever since they went to 1 buck. Just you shoot whatever you want, spike, 190 inch, it doesn't matter. You want to shoot, you get 1 buck. It don't matter what weapon you're using it that time of year. You just get 1 buck and you're done. And it has made guys so much more selective, especially after, I've done it myself, but especially when you burn that one and only tag the first 2 weeks of October, and then you're twiddling your thumbs when your buddies are chasing giants in the rut, and you're like, oh man, I wish I was in a tree right now. Or you dare to climb in a tree to doe hunt, and then you watch a giant buck come by chasing does, and you're tagged out. So I mean, it's just the 1 buck law there in Indiana was the best thing they could have ever done. And man, I hope and pray that one day I get to see them do it in the state of Michigan, because that bottom 2 to 3 hours of the state, Michigan, the soil quality is so great. The habitat is so phenomenal. Oh my gosh, the quality of deer that could come out of the state would just be phenomenal.
yeah. So we were talking a little bit about it before we started recording. We were talking, kind of recapping our conversation with Don Higgins, and talking about where he hunts and where we hunt, and just you know just the characteristics of deer in various areas. Pick anywhere across the country, really, and everything. So we can narrow that down to the example that you just gave for starters, but yeah, how would that change it, with given the characteristics, like the qualities and everything you were just mentioning and everything? What's the average deer now, and what could something like that do to improve that?
Man, I would say the sky is the limit, like I said, for the bottom 3 hours of the state of Michigan. And that's not including the UP of Michigan, clearly. That's the thumb of Michigan, southern Michigan. You take, a little bit north of Grand Rapids and draw a straight line east to west, and all that south there's got really good quality soil, a lot of ag, a lot of farmland, a lot of woods, a lot of swamps, a lot of creeks, etc. And man, the genetics of the deer that we have in southern Michigan are on par, if not superior, than what I've witnessed, at least in the northern half of Indiana. I usually stay within the north 2 hours of the state of Indiana, is where I've done almost all my hunting in Indiana over my whole entire life. I would be willing to bet a large sum of money that within 5 years that southern half of Michigan would probably be blowing out the entire state of Indiana.
Wow.
And I know that is might sound outlandish, but from someone that's lived it for the last 5+ years now, and then also grew up within 10 minutes of Michigan my entire life, man, I don't think the Michigan DNR really realizes what they have. They're sitting on a gold mine here in southern Michigan. If they could just 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 change it. I mean, there's other colorful words that you could use to get a point across, but it's not going to work. But if they could just change it to 1 buck and just try it for 5 years and see how it goes. That's what they did in Indiana. And back when they changed that in the early 2000s, I was one of the guys that threw my hands up. I'm like, this is retarded. Why are we changing this? We could kill 1 buck with a bow, 1 buck with a gun, and everybody was happy. Well, state of Indiana was looking at Ohio and what they were killing over there. They were looking at Illinois and what they were killing over there, and they're like, that's bordering states. The agriculture is the same. The soil is pretty on par, etc. Why are we not killing that type of deer here? So they went down to 1 buck, and I'll be honest with you, every single one of us that threw a fit about it within 3 years said that is the best thing they could have ever done. And we all ate crow. I can remember guys just throwing a fit at local archery shops and and bait and tackle shops when the subject would get brought up, and all of them admitting we were all wrong. Within 3 years, we're like, oh my word, did this make such a monumental change? So with that being said, I think Michigan would just be phenomenal. The results, I think it would help the entire state just go to 1 buck, even including the UP. But the southern half, with the quality of the genetics and the quality of the feed and the habitat that they have there's way more habitat in southern Michigan than there is in northern Indiana for deer to hide. It's not even close. It's literally 2-3x the amount of habitat for them to hide in, to be able to get some age class. So yeah, it would be absolutely phenomenal. Man, that would make me so happy. I know so many people that are, every time we harvest a deer in the state of Michigan, you have to fill out online and they ask you for your questions and your comments. And then when the season's over, they ask you, what's your comments on how we can make things better? And we're all saying, we need to go to 1 buck. And I put on there, I'm from Indiana. I watched it. I lived the change. It's just a simple fact that I've lived up in Michigan since 2019. But if I want to kill a 4-year-old or older, I go to Indiana every year. Since 2019, there was 1 year I didn't kill a 4-year-old or older in the state of Indiana, and that was in 2021, where my best spot got hit with EHD.
Wow.
But every year since then, I've killed 4, 5, and 6-year-olds, and going all the way back to 2010. Going back to 2010, there was, a couple of those years I killed those 140s. Those were 3-year-olds. But yeah, I mean, I would say since 2010, there was only 1 year I didn't fill a tag, and that was because I couldn't find a 4-year-old. And then a couple other years where I killed some 140-inch 3-year-old type deer, 135, 145-inch 3-year-old deer in Indiana. But that whole time I've been in Michigan since 2019, I've killed one over 4 years old.
Wow.
And I actually lowered my standards in 22 and killed a 3-year-old in Michigan with my bow, just because I was just getting so frustrated. And then after I shot him, I was happy I got him. But then at the same time, I was like, this isn't what I set out to do.
Yeah.
When I decided I was going to let these deer get some age to them. So once again, here we are, 2024, and the season's going to end in 2 days on January 1st. And unless something happens in the next 2 days, I won't be punching another tag in Michigan, and haven't since 2021. And that was on a 3-year-old. In 2020, I killed a 5-year-old behind the house, and we bought the property in 19, had pictures of this deer in 19. I knew he was at least 3, maybe 4. I thought he was 3. He was my target buck going into the next year. Harvested him, had the teeth sent out. Actually came back, he was 5.
So this is getting off into the weeds, maybe a little bit more than I intended, but I'm curious. You talked about Indiana looking at neighboring states, making a shift that ended up being beneficial. Michigan hasn't done that. I know different states label it different, whether it's DNR or Parks and Wildlife or Fish and Game, whatever. But what's the big difference between those departments in the 2 states that you're looking at, Indiana and Michigan, and what would have to change in Michigan to make that happen? If there's a bunch of people such as yourself that are, are they just not listening to the feedback, or?
How can I say this as politely as possible without offending people?
I'm not trying to get too political or anything here. I was just my curiosity
It's
is
not even politics. It's not politics, but we got to wait for the old heads to die off.
yeah, it's just how we've always done it type mentalities.
I mean, you got these guys. There's not. They're already. It's already. Slowly becoming less and less. But you got all these guys that, I'm 40 years old, so you got a lot of guys that are, let's say 60 and older, that still love the outdoors, and God bless their soul, and I will until my last breath. And so they grew up a certain way, and they have deer camp, and they do things a certain way. And I'll be, you know what, if we're going to change that. And so that's there, even though I would say they're actually being aged out to the point where they're more of a minority, I think they're a very vocal minority. And I also think that a lot of the people that have the power to make that decision, a lot of them still fit into that category
I got you.
where I mean, I tell people all the time, it is gospel in the state of Michigan. November 15th is the gun opener. It does not matter what day it starts. It's a Monday, it's a Sunday, it's a Friday, it's a Wednesday. Mark it on the calendar in blood. It will be there November 15th. And guess what? November 30th will be the last day you can hunt deer with a gun in Michigan during the first rifle season. That's been that way since I think the 90s, if I remember right, maybe the 80s. And it's been, well, I know I started my very first deer hunts back in the late 90s, and it was that way back then. And I want to say it was before the 90s. So they're just very stuck in their traditions. I mean, we all went up to the UP of Michigan. I mean, that's where I killed my first 2 deer when I was 14 and 15 years old in the late 90s, going up to the UP of Michigan, 8-hour drive. I didn't have ground to hunt in Indiana where I live. We didn't really have that many deer in the 90s in Indiana. We drove 8 hours. You go up there and there's hundreds of deer. And that's how I got my first deer. We had deer camp. And I thank God that I was raised that way and got to witness the old traditions because they're no longer traditions for most of these people. But with that being said, you know, change is always inevitable. And I do feel like at some point in my life, we will see the state of Michigan go to $1. And I hope it's just sooner than later. I hope it's not because of something catastrophic like EHD and they've just wiped so many deer out that they're just like, we have no choice but to go to $1 because then I don't think we'll be able to reap the rewards that we would otherwise.
That makes sense. I understand that angle. I would wonder if that would be the angle to play too. Like, hey, get ahead of it. I don't know,
Yeah.
but I don't know. That's just kind of shooting into the wind a little bit on that one. But
Yeah.
so before we wrap up the show, I did want to talk to you and just ask you again, highlighting your show and your efforts on the habitat improvement side of everything. What have been what have been some things that have really worked for you this year, and what are some things that you're looking to either shift or change or even continue doing for 2025?
Probably what's worked for me is still implementing new water holes. That is definitely still just been a huge, you know, if you don't have water, at least that, I mean, obviously you got to look at the ground that you're hunting. But if you have dry ground where you don't have water on your ground and you can be able to pull deer into certain areas, especially thickets where they feel safe, thick areas, um, the water holes has just been key. I've got multiple spots in mind that I want to add water holes to this off season. I'm really excited about the scrape posts. I'm still enjoying seeing the action on those. I want to continue to implement those. I might try something different next year. Instead of oak branches, I might get some cedar branches. Um, I'm always just trying things different. I've heard a lot of good things. I've seen the few cedar trees that we have around here where they are almost like magnets to deer. And I'm sure it has something to do with the aroma that they put off on them also. Um, the food plot on the food plot side of things, this year was a very interesting and difficult year because we had such a dry summer, and that's where this EHD had came from that we spoke about earlier. So the food plots were tough. I mean, I had some plots down in Indiana that were over an hour away that, man, they didn't do hardly anything because they got even less rain and they're so far away I couldn't water them. My plot here at the house, I have a 250-gallon water tank that I put on the front of the forks of the tractor with a pump. And I know for a fact that I put at least 1,250 gallons on my half-acre food plot behind my house over the course of 3 different waterings, just to basically just to keep it alive.
Yeah.
We did have good rain to get it to germinate and stuff. I had corn planted earlier in the year. I had soybeans planted earlier in the year. But when I come in late to plant my brassicas, man, I got one rain and that was it for like, outside of me watering it, we got like one rain for like 6 weeks.
Mm.
And it was within the first week, so it was just enough to germinate it. And then everything just starts wilting, and then you're like, crap, I don't want to die. So I'm out here watering it, trying to keep it going. And wow, the results showed, because my food plot behind the house just turned out phenomenal. I got brassica bulbs that are the size of soccer balls almost.
Wow.
I mean, shameless plug for Double Tine Innovations. That's who, I'm partnered with, and with Midwest Mindset, and they provide me with food plot seed. And goodness gracious, some of the brassicas and the knee-high green vegetation off of the brassicas before the deer ate it to even get to the bulbs. I mean, I had so much food behind the house this year in that little half-acre plot, between the corn, the soybeans, and the brassicas, that, I mean, there's still, here we are at the end of season, and there's still months worth of food back there on that little
Wow.
half-acre plot.
That's awesome. Very
But
cool.
I will say, one of the failures this year was probably due to the crappy weather and the lack of rain. But I think I'm going to start going away from standalone corn plantings until I can get access to enough ground to make it worth it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Um, that 8 acres down the road last year, I did a 3/4 acre corn plot down there. Turned out phenomenal. It was the first time I did it. It was almost like the wildlife didn't know what was going on, because the soil hadn't been worked in God knows how long, and nothing had been planted. So they let it do its thing. It turned out absolutely phenomenal. Well, this year I come in double the size of it. I'm going for like over an acre and a quarter to an acre and a half of corn, and they absolutely annihilated it as soon as it grew. Like, most of it didn't even get knee high, and just the wildlife was just annihilating it. So that was a failure that I had learned this year as someone that's newer to planting corn. I've planted almost everything else a lot of years in a row, but I've really been branching off into the corn, because I like the idea of it being a screen and a food source. Because some of these areas I'm trying to screen off, maybe it's due to access, maybe in that particular location it's due to the road. So I'm trying to make it so it's less likely for people to see in, the deer to see out. And I think starting next year, a lot of these plantings that I'm wanting to do from a screening side of things, I'm still going to plant corn, but I'm going to mix it in. I'm going to do a more of a wildlife blend, where it's still going to be heavy corn, but it's going to have, grain, sorghum. I might even throw some Egyptian wheat in there, even though that gets extremely tall around here. That can get 10, 12 foot tall. And maybe sunflowers, maybe some wild hemp. I don't know. I'm going to talk to Double Time first of all, see what they've got cooking. And then I'm also going to talk to my local, ag store down the road here, where they have a feed mill, and see what we can come up with. Because I want something that's going to stay thick, but yet have food, and not have just one food source that gets hammered,
Yeah.
like the corn did.
No, that makes 100% sense. Awesome. Well, man, I'm glad that I know that the EHD is tough to deal with up there and everything, but in spite of all the trials that came with that and everything, it sounds like it was a productive year for you. So
Yeah, I mean, I know I mentioned earlier in the video that my wife had actually harvested one of the 3-year-olds that we had in the summer, and they came back. So I would be in trouble if I didn't bring that deer up and that hunt, because my wife, she did hunt her butt off this year. For her, maybe not, some other people may not think that, but as a mother of 3 that homeschools and does the things that she does, she doesn't have a lot of time. And I work so much that it's, I'm the babysitter for when she can hunt. And so she probably got in, we were trying to guess, somewhere around 20 to 25 sits this year,
wow.
before she got that double that night behind the house. But she just had I mean, it was just bad luck after bad luck. She'd sit today, and then the bucks would be sitting underneath her tree stand tomorrow. Or they were there yesterday, so she hunted today and they didn't show up. At one property that she hunted in Indiana, she saw her target 2 different times in archery season, just never could get him in range. She passed up. She passed up a couple nice 2-year-old bucks, trying, waiting for them. But behind the house, she just kept playing cat and mouse with this 8-pointer and then this other 9-pointer that she ended up harvesting. And I remember the night that I finally talked to her. Well, I talked her into going out again. She did not want to go. She's like, we are not seeing deer. They're not cooperating. We're only seeing does. The bucks aren't cooperating. And I told her, I said, listen, this is the first warm up after the 5 to 6 days of just really cold, snowy weather. It's 38 degrees today. The sun was shining for the first time in days. The barometer is over 30.3 and rising. I said, I swear we're going to have a good night. You may not see your target buck, but we're going to see deer. And man, was I right, because we didn't get out there we weren't even out there 20 minutes. Deer start popping out 2 hours before dark. I don't know how many deer we actually saw because they were kind of in and out and amongst each other. But I know that when she shot the doe, we had 11 deer on our half-acre food plot, 2 little bucks, and then the rest were flatheads mixed in with button bucks, obviously. And I told her before the hunt, I said, we'll bring your bow and we'll bring the gun because that's legal in the state of Michigan. And I said, if a doe comes in super early, we'll have you shoot it with your bow. If not, we'll just use the gun. Well, 5 minutes before dark, the big guy doesn't look like it's showing up. She's been just defeated. She's about ready to give up. And I look at her, I said, well, it looks like he ain't going to show up tonight, honey. I'm sorry. Why don't you just shoot one of these big does so you can feel like you've accomplished something this year and put some meat in the freezer. So fast forward, she shoots this big doe with the 44 mag, got it on video, runs over to the side of the food plot, tips over, makes it maybe 40 yards. And these deer just stand there. Like I said, we had 11 deer in the food plot, all under 60 yards from the blind. And they just stand there. And I'm like, what in the world? Well, then they trot off like 40, 50 yards, just get off the food plot. And they're sitting in the timber on the edge. And my wife's like, do you want to go get the deer? And I'm like, no, let's just sit here. I do not want these deer watching us get out of the blind. I do not want them to watch us get out of this blind. So we sat there, hugged, high five, good job. Great shot, sweetie. Great shot, And all of a sudden she goes, well, what's that big deer? Because we had a good amount of snow on the ground, so you could see pretty good, even in the thick woods. And she's like, well, what's that? That looks like a big deer. I pulled the binos up and I was like, wow, that's just a big doe. She's like, oh my gosh. And I said, yeah, that's a huge doe. So next thing you know, she goes, well, what's that behind it? And I look, I said, that's just another giant doe. And as I'm watching this doe, I'll look behind her and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's your 9-pointer. She's like, you're kidding me. This is literally 60 to 90 seconds after she just shot that doe.
Wow.
With a 44 mag. And they come straight into the food plot like nothing had happened. These 3, they clearly weren't in that group of deer. And they come right into the food plot, and this buck comes right in and just stops and just faces frontal at 50 yards. And I'm like, crap. She's like, do you want me to shoot him frontal? I'm like, not really, because if you move the tiniest bit, you're going to wound that deer or miss him. And we've been waiting for this opportunity all year. And I literally look at my phone. I'm like, we've got 2 minutes of legal light left. And then he's still facing us. I look at my phone. We got 1 minute legal light left. I look at her and I'm like, I guess you're going to have to shoot him frontal. Are you solid? She's like, I'm solid. Because I got her on the bog pod shooting tripod. So she's locked in there, loaded. And right then he turns and takes 2 steps, perfect broadside. Boom. Watch him go maybe 80 yards and drop. And that's when the celebration started. And it's just like, I'm sitting there in the blind. And to me, it's like, this is what all the 365 days worth of work leading up to this was for. Yeah. All that time and money I spend on our property trying to make it better, trying to draw in deer, trying to help these deer maybe get a little bit older, trying to make these deer feel safer. And I'm like, the joy and the excitement on my wife's face and the tears of joy literally running down her face, and the phone call to our daughter up at the house to let her know that mom just got her second deer, because we already let her know she got the first deer in a text. And then just getting all the kids together and flashlights and tractors and ATVs and going back and retrieving the deer and just the celebration. It's like, to me, I didn't have to kill a deer this year, even though I killed 3. And it's like, I didn't have to kill a single deer this year for it to be a success, because my kids were successful and my wife was successful. And it's like, man, at the stage that I'm at in my hunting journey, that means so much more to me than me killing 140, 150, 160 inch buck. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd love to every single year, but if you told me, hey, you had to give that up so that they could kill bucks every year and you could watch their love and enjoyment for the outdoors grow, every single year substantially, I would give it up in a heartbeat.
Yeah. 100%, man. No, very, very well said. Well, man, I feel like, first off, I say this to many guests, but we could sit here and talk hunting probably into the wee hours of the morning. But
We've done it before.
we have done it before. That's a fact. On the phone, keeping each other awake, driving you back to Michigan, me back to Texas from Colorado. That was a long yet enjoyable conversation. But
Yes, it was.
anyway, I appreciate you. Appreciate you taking some time to come back on the show and everything. And I know it won't be the last time we'll have you back on here in the near future, but appreciate it.
Yeah, we got some fingers crossed. We got some good news brewing here in the Tepe household, and going to be pretty exciting. That's to say the least. So
Yeah, more to come on that. Just we'll leave you guys on a cliffhanger. Well, appreciate you, man. Again, I encourage anybody tuning into this podcast, if you haven't checked out the Midwest Mindset series on CarbonTV, it's also on the YouTube. But either of those platforms, you guys can go check out Mike and all the awesome stuff he's doing out there. Subscribe to the podcast if you're not already. With that, I'm going to hang it up, wrap it up, be back with you guys again next week for another Fall Obsession podcast episode, and I'll catch you then.